I'll say this. Thank you, Jayden Daniels. And Lions fans know exactly what I'm talking about. As of the time of this recording, the Commanders just finished off a miracle win against the Philadelphia Eagles, handing Philly their third loss of the season. This is obviously huge, as Detroit, who won, and we will talk about that, puts themselves in better position to at least have a home playoff game, potentially still the 1 seed. Now the Vikings are currently playing, and when this is uploaded, you will know the results of that game. I obviously can't tell the future, so I don't know what the result of that game is or is going to be, but huge moment. It feels like the Tigers playoff chase, where you're not only watching your team, but you're watching to see what other teams do, and Jayden Daniels and the Commanders helped out the Lions. This was a huge weekend for the Detroit Lions, and that's obviously where we'll start. This was a week of uncertainty in the sense that I feel like one team came into that game against Buffalo and another team left, and we didn't know what version of them we were going to get in this Sunday game against the Chicago Bears. You know, all year I have felt like the Lions have been the best team in football, and all year, while I've maybe not specifically said it, I've felt like the best team in football is going to be the one that wins the Super Bowl, and I figured that team was the Lions. Last week was really the first time where I started to question that, and it had very little to do with the actual loss to Buffalo, because regardless, look, I'm not even going to call that game like a dud of a game. It was a very well-played game. You lost to Josh Allen, but they basically played perfect 11 weeks in a row. They'd won 11 consecutive games. They dropped one against Buffalo in a potential Super Bowl preview. Okay, I'm not going to knock you for that. It's more so the injuries have just been so killer, and not just so killer in terms of what it means for your team physically, but I think what it means for your team psychologically as well, to see team leaders and guys who have been key contributors to this football team go down with season-ending injuries. Now, David Montgomery looks like may potentially be back at some point, but defensively, they're completely depleted. Now you have to go on the road against Chicago, and look, I know the Bears are a mess, but they had you on the ropes. I mean, they really had you on the ropes in Thanksgiving. That's kind of really when the injury bug started to rear its ugly head for Detroit. They have a quarterback in Caleb Williams who's seemingly gotten better as the year has gone along. You're without a lot of your key pieces defensively. And while Chicago's not going to the playoffs, they at least have the potential to kind of play spoiler for you. And the Lions went out and played. It wasn't a perfect game, but it was perfect because of its imperfections in a bizarre way, where they've had more efficient games this year. Jacksonville was more efficient. Seattle was more efficient. The game against Tennessee was more efficient, but I would argue that might have been the most important victory of the season for the Lions, because we were very concerned about what we were going to see from them coming into this game, given the amount of injuries that they'd had. And well, I've been as worried about the injuries as anybody, right? At the same time, those problems will persist. The potential lack of pass rush, some issues in the secondary. Like, I'm not going to act like all these problems are just evaporated and they've now gone away because the Lions won one game against the Bears. But the one thing I've kind of felt in the back of my head is it sucks to have all these defensive players out, but you still got Goff, you still got Gibbs, you still got St. Brown, you still got J-Mo, you still got Laporta, you still got a heavy majority of this offensive line. Bottom line, you still have most of what is far and away the best offense in football. And well, of course, there's another side of the game. It's like, I still don't know how many defenses in the NFL are going to be able to contain this offense, even when it's at 80-90% full strength. And we saw that against Buffalo. The reason they lost to Buffalo wasn't because they couldn't score points. They've dropped 42. Jared Goff almost threw for 500 yards. Now, I know a big reason for it was they were playing from behind for a heavy majority of the game, but you get my point. So they come out in this game against Chicago, force a 3-and-out defensively, drive right down the field, kick a field goal. And then this is just where my faith in this team is so high. It scares me how legit my faith is in this squad, because you're without a million players. But as Dan Campbell said on the radio last week, I don't care if you win by a point. We got to find ways to win. And how do you do that in the early part of a game against the Bears? You force 2 early turnovers before Chicago could even blink. The score was 20-7, 20-3. Goff and the offense was moving the ball efficiently. Ben Johnson, I think, called a phenomenal game. And well, you're obviously without kind of one of the heart and soul key pieces of your offense is David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs is just unbelievable. I mean, I would argue the numbers are very impressive, but Jahmyr Gibbs, I thought, looked as impressive as a running back can possibly look in the NFL. That guy is a thoroughbred. And I think that there's kind of this perception that call him Sonic and Knuckles, obviously, but there's kind of this perception that David Montgomery is the guy that gets the hard yards. You know, he's more of the bruiser, the short yardage guy, whereas Gibbs is more of the speedster, the flashier player. And while don't get me wrong, Jahmyr Gibbs in space is as exciting as any player in the NFL. This guy's capable of getting hard yards too. I mean, he is the best kind of running back where he's not solely a finesse guy. He's not solely a speed guy, but he's not solely a power guy. Just played a remarkable game against Chicago, as did Jared Goff. And I think this is where the leadership of Campbell rubs off on these players. There's just no panic. If you didn't know what the Lions had dealt with as far as their injuries are concerned over the last several weeks of the season, you would have thought coming into this game that this was a team at full strength with no injuries, nothing to report, and they were just going to work. They forced turnovers early, and while Aaron Glenn, I think we criticized him rightfully so for that kind of dud of a performance against Buffalo, I think that how do I put this? It was a perfect storm against Buffalo in the sense that not only did you have a lot of injuries, but those injuries played right into Buffalo's hands where you got these inexperienced members of the secondary in single coverage against their wideouts. Josh Allen made some ridiculous throws. And while you don't want to give up 48 in a game, that was a game where Josh Allen did Josh Allen things. And if you have a quarterback of his magnitude, Mahomes is like this as well, Burrow is like this as well, and they're just slinging it, your coverage can be great, pass rush can be great, and ultimately it's still going to result in them making plays. Now, there were a lot of issues still defensively with that game last Sunday, but you get my point. You go up against Caleb Williams in this game, you force the early turnovers. And while Caleb definitely made some throws, this is just a Bears team that I think is so demoralized from having so many close losses that I think they started to get a here we go again vibe in the early part of their game. And I just never had any doubt at that point that the Lions weren't going to hold on and win. And they probably left some points on the board. You went for it on a 4th and 3 and didn't convert. But man, this was a game that they absolutely needed for the players, obviously, but I think even more so to alleviate the fans' stress of what kind of team are we going to get for the remainder of the season. And well, hey, if I could choose, obviously, I'd like to have those injured players back. The fact that they're capable of putting up a performance like this with their backs against the wall, seemingly, this is it's their best chance, man. Every single time, and there's been instances, a lot of them, that I've thought, here's where the other shoe drops. It just never does with this football team. They are as tough mentally and physically as they come. Such a good, fun unit to watch. And I mean, as far as what else there is to say, I mean, most of what else there is to say has to do with other games, because not only do you win and take care of business against Chicago, your next game is on the road in San Francisco against the Niners. I know the Niners have been something of a mess this season, but you get a chance to get maybe some revenge for losing in the NFC Championship game last year. And then obviously you finish the season against Minnesota. What has been so annoying is that even with all of the injuries, if the Vikings and Eagles would have just slipped up a few times throughout this season over the last 3 months, we wouldn't be stressing out about a team maybe not getting a home playoff game. But the Eagles lose in the last second on a remarkable drive by Jayden Daniels, who is just an absolute baller. I mean, it's bizarre to say this about a rookie, but he has picked up right where he left off at LSU when he won the Heisman, where he is just, they got new ownership there too in Washington, but he's changed the culture. He's got that place believing, and he drove them down the field basically entirely on his own. I mean, he made plays with his legs, made plays with his arms, scored a touchdown with 5 seconds left in the game to go in front for good. The Eagles fall. That's their 3rd loss of the season. So now Detroit is officially ahead of them in terms of home field advantage. Look, they got 2 more games to play, and I know there's been a lot of wacky circumstances and even unfortunate circumstances with the injuries, but if you would have told me before this season that the Lions were going to be 13-2 up a game with on the next closest team with the possibility of getting a 1 seed and finishing the year at 15-2, I'm taking that. And I know that there's been a lot of things that maybe haven't gone their way, but to me, that's almost a positive in the sense that I think the true measure of the greatness of a team, there's certain teams out there that we can praise and fluff because they look good when things are going well. The amount of times I've seen things go sideways for this group, and yet they continually bounce back. It is a testament to their culture, a testament to their coaching staff, and a testament to the roster that Brad Holmes has been able to put together, even kind of duct taping this defense together with the amount of injuries that they've had. So yeah, a remarkable game and a remarkable performance for a team that has continued to do it all year. Nothing but positives. That was really sensational. This might be a bit of a shorter show. Obviously, there was no college football in terms of Michigan and Michigan State this week, but there was college basketball. Michigan played 2 games. One of them they dominated on Sunday against Purdue Fort Wayne. Very efficient game. I mean, they shot the ball incredibly well from 3. They had a lot of different guys score. It was one of those games that, like, you put on the schedule in the hopes that it's basically a tune-up, but that's the problem with college basketball. Very often those, quote, tune-up games end up turning into legitimately competitive games. It's obvious Purdue Fort Wayne is not very good. Michigan took advantage of it after a brutal, brutal loss to Oklahoma. And well, it's kind of easy considering the fact that they just wanted to maybe paint things with a rose-colored brush, so to speak. I'm not glad Michigan lost to Oklahoma. They shouldn't have lost to Oklahoma. But I remember I was thinking to myself, the last time that I was this mad after a Michigan basketball loss was probably the Elite 8 game against UCLA in 2021. Maybe there's one that I'm missing. But the reason for that is because I think Michigan is better than Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma's had a wonderful season. They're undefeated, right? And they beat Michigan by a point. It's close. But when Michigan plays games where, let's say they go to Breslin against a good Izzo team and they lose by 10, hey, that happens to everyone, right? I mean, this is life in the league. It's life in college basketball. But I get very upset when I feel like Michigan is not playing up to their standard. And what this team is reminding me of a little bit. Now, I'm not saying, okay, hear me out. I am not saying they are going to be this good. But I remember the 2013 team pictured with the Trey Burke shot right behind me. They finished the year, the regular season, 7-7 that year. They were number 1 in the country at one point and really stumbled down the stretch. They were the 5th seed in their own conference tournament. And what was so frustrating about that team, and keep in mind, this was before we saw any Final Fours, any Elite Eights or Big Ten championships, any second weekends. What was so frustrating about that team is throughout the entire year and during that run, I was watching them saying, this team has the ability to be as good as anyone, but they were playing down to their competition. You saw them lose to some inferior teams. You saw them losing. I remember they lost to a winless Penn State team, a team that was winless in conference late in that season. That was just a disaster. And the reason I bring all this up is that I think that there is that greatness inside of this Michigan team, and I feel that way about teams whose biggest hurdle is themselves. And I don't want to reiterate this all year. I don't want to make this a talking point all year, but I mean, part of that's on them. Maybe they should, maybe they should go about not turning the ball over so I don't have to bring this up, but you see these glimpses. And while it was Purdue Fort Wayne, I think the Purdue Fort Wayne game in a lot of ways was kind of a clinic in regards to what this offense can be. Now, they did have some turnovers in the first part of the first half, but as a whole, they were much more efficient. When this team is able to space the floor and get their shooters going, this can be as good an offensive team as there is in the Big Ten, arguably in the country, if they just limit the turnovers. People talk about the 2 7-footers, but what makes the Area 51 duo so unique is the fact that Danny Wolf doesn't play like a 7-footer. I mean, he does down low, but the guy can dribble. He goes behind the back. I mean, he's unbelievable with the ball in his hands. He's a great passer. But when the spacing is right and you can get Namari Burnett open and you can get Donaldson on the dribble and pop, these guys, you got to clamp down on all of them. Now this team doesn't have the number 1 guaranteed go-to bucket like they did with Burke in 2013, but they have a lot of guys that they can go to. And when I look at the games that they've lost this year, well, you give the opponent credit for making plays down the stretch that Michigan wasn't able to make. I feel like it's been more so Michigan making the mistakes that has cost them as opposed to other teams necessarily going out and taking it. And I hate to go with the whole glass half full principle with this, but that does inspire hope because I would much rather lose these games in November and December than lose them in March. And this will be a team that's going to play in March. And the fact that I can say that with such confidence, not even halfway through the regular season, we've barely even started Big Ten play, is a testament to the roster that Dusty's put together and these players. You can tell that this team knows each other very well. Sometimes they move at too quick a pace and it costs them, but when they're right, they are very fun to watch. And that Oklahoma game was a gut punch, but the teams they've lost to for the most part have been quality opponents. They haven't really been upset by some mid-major. They got basically one more tune-up game before things really kind of get kicked into high gear with the conference schedule. I wish they would have figured out a way to win that Oklahoma game. They should have. They kind of spit it up at the end. but as a whole, I do still like where this team is at. And I also like where Michigan State is at. They rolled against Florida Atlantic over the weekend. With this point in college basketball, and it makes college basketball a little bit tougher to talk about than college football because there are more games. But I feel like every game in college football, there's a certain identity to it. There's a certain flow to it. There's a lot to analyze. What I've seen from Michigan State against Florida Atlantic was pretty much what I've seen from them throughout the season, which is I think that this is emerging as one of Izzo's better teams of recent memory. They're starting to share some of that DNA that sounds kind of weird. They're starting to share bodily fluids in regards to their look and their makeup as a team. They have that kind of toughness that I'm not saying other Izzo teams have lacked, but they have not dominated on the boards the way in the past years, the way that some other Izzo teams have done. I think they have efficient guard play. I think they're similar to Michigan in the sense that I don't know if there's necessarily a guaranteed go-to bucket. I mean, if you had to break it down, I think Danny Wolf is Michigan's best option and Jayden Akins is Michigan State's best option, but they have several guys that can score. They have guys that can space the floor. I think the big men, that's really where I think this is going to be the determining factor in regards to Michigan State's ceiling this year. Jackson Kohler looks pretty darn good. And you got Fiddler and you got the big guys down low who I think are going to develop. You talk about Cohen Carr, who is such an electric player and dunker. He's one of those guys where if he can get going, if he can become a guy who really bursts onto the scene in the latter part of the season, that's another weapon because he's the best athlete on the team for sure. He's just a very raw talent. And I think it is a team of raw talent, but it's a team of raw talent that's consistently gotten better as the years gone along. And I think they're going to, they're going to continue to improve. It feels like, and just kind of reading Izzo's body language and the way that he talks in press conferences, it feels like he has a better understanding and gauge on this team than some other teams he's had in the past. And I've talked about last year's squad, how outside of Tyson Walker being an automatic bucket, nothing ever really felt right with that group. Things feel more right with this team. And I feel like this cripples me a little bit as somebody who breaks down these teams. So I don't know nearly as much about the Big Ten in basketball as I do in football. I'm not completely sure who the contenders are. And that is often the case in college basketball. You never really know. I mean, teams come into the year ranked in the top 5. They drop out of the top 25. Weird stuff happens. But based on the eye test of what I've seen from both programs in the state, I think that they are going to be playing very meaningful basketball late into the season. Now, am I saying they're going to meet each other in the Final Four? No. But they have the potential to be a team that's playing second, even third weekend. I really do feel that way because I think that their trajectory is going to continue to go upward. I think they're both very well coached. I think that even with the amount of portal guys that Michigan has, there is a fair amount of experience here. I'm really happy to see this because, like I said, the last few years were kind of whatever. It's just, man, I don't want to rip on, but Juwan Howard's teams just brought down the vibes, man. They really did. It was, and when we talked to Anthony Bellino about it on Chris and Company, like he mentioned the fact that there was a vibe where you couldn't tell how much those guys really wanted to win over the last few years. And I think that's the antithesis of a Tom Izzo program where even his worst teams, like these guys would run through a wall for him. The last few years, there was a level of lethargy, I think, in regards to lethargicness, in regards to the way that they played. And it made them not particularly fun to watch, but kind of unlikable. I don't feel that way about the teams, about Michigan this year. Definitely don't feel that way about Michigan State. So a lot to be excited about in regards to college basketball. Not a lot to be excited about. Oh, what a segue. Not a lot to be excited about in regards to my Detroit Tigers. And I want to talk about this because as of the time of this recording, unless something happens in the 8 hours between when, Austin is editing this and when I finally upload it, the Tigers still have not signed anybody other than 37-year-old Alex Cobb to a 1-year contract. Look, Scott Harris, this is where I'll start with this. Scott Harris he would be a wonderful politician with the way he gives answers to questions in press conferences. But if you do some just basic kind of deep diving into what he says in these end of the year press conferences, you get a pretty good sense of what he's looking to do in the offseason. And to his credit, whether we're a fan of it or not, he has often followed through on some of those promises. Like, for instance, last year he said, we want to add starting pitching depth. We want to add bullpen pieces, maybe look for a third baseman. That's exactly what they did. Now, we could sit here and debate those moves, like Maeda and Shelby Miller, disasters. Jack Flaherty, a spectacular win. He gave him a great first half, and then they flipped him at the deadline. Urshela was kind of a nothing, but at least in terms of what they've wanted to add, the success rate we can argue about, but what they've wanted to add, they've essentially done. I try to, as a fan of this team, as a guy who loves this team, and as a guy who's followed them, to me, as closely as a fan can really do over the last 7-8 years. I like to believe that I have some understanding of what they're trying to do on a year-by-year basis in these off seasons. And when we get to the end of the off season and I feel disappointed, I'll express that disappointment. I'll just be real with you guys right now. I have absolutely no clue what the Tigers are doing this offseason. Now, coming into this, it seemed like they wanted to get a right-handed bat, which makes a lot of sense. Right. This was a team that was completely neutralized against lefties last year. No Kerry Carpenter. Riley doesn't hit lefties great. Colt's a lefty. I mean, they really need to add some right-handed pop to kind of figure things out in the lineup. And while I do think we will see improvement from guys like Justin Hunter Malloy, who is a righty, it seemed like Harris was pretty intense on, we got to go out and try to add a right-handed bat. Now, that's not to say that this offseason is over, but this is an issue that has bothered me with Harris. It's an issue that sure as hell bothered me with Avila. Why do you wait until 11:59 to do something that needs to be done by midnight? They do this at deadlines. They do this in off seasons. You can sign a guy at any point. That's like I understand there's politicking involved, and I understand that there's negotiation. If I was running a baseball team, I would have my mindset on a certain group of players I wanted to bring on that the fucking second the World Series ended. What are they doing? That's the most frustrating part is there's the smartest guy in the room scenario with Scott Harris, which works when you have the smartest guy in the room. When it doesn't, it's maddening. And all of what I'm saying, all of the frustration that I'm sharing right now totally goes out the window if they sign Alex Bregman. If they get Bregman, it changes not only how I feel about this offseason, it changes how I feel about the team. With Alex Bregman, I think this team becomes the favorite to win the American League Central. And that's one area where I do have to defend Detroit to a certain extent. The rest of the division is seemingly trying to get worse. The Twins have their thumbs up their asses. Cleveland just traded Josh Naylor. The Royals are the only team that's kind of done anything. They re-signed Walker, but they haven't, Walker was there last year. They haven't added a whole lot to this group. But if the best compliment I can give you is you aren't getting actively worse the way some other teams in the division are, that's not a compliment, man. And it's the most frustrating thing because last season was a really big moment for a lot of casual Tiger fans. That team, they got us to believe again. And I think what we hoped for out of this offseason is I want to see the organization believe in themselves again, because we kind of had these discussions a year ago at this time. At the end of 2023, they won, I believe, 78 games, right? Not some earth-shattering season, but we said, hey, man, this was a weak division. It turned out to be good, but we thought at the time, this is a weak division. If you can just add a piece here or there and get 5-6 wins better, you can not only compete for the playoffs, you can maybe even compete to win the American League Central. And while it was a very non-conventional route, they did end up improving from where they were the year before and making the postseason. Now, it took an incredible run. Do I think that this team has another 38-11 stretch? No, absolutely not. But I do think, I genuinely do think that they're closer to the 86 win team than they were to the team that was at one point 9 games under 500 relatively late into last season. There's still a lot of good players here. There's still a lot of upside to these young guys. So we believe in this again. It is very frustrating to me that this is seemingly the second offseason in a row in which Scott Harris is basically saying to the fans, we don't believe in this yet. And look, if they were losing 100 games, I'd get it. I totally understand it. If you guys remember me during the tank years, the worst of the Avila years when I was fat, I would come on here and people would bring up free agents and I'd say, look, man, I want to go out and get this guy too. This team stinks. And if we add the biggest free agent on the market, it's the difference between 100 losses and 95 losses. And while of course I'd like to see good players here, we're at a point right now where even adding doesn't do us a whole lot of good. This is different. I mean, how many games do they need to win to prove to themselves and to the fans that this is a legitimate thing? Because next year, I feel like we're going to be talking about a 95-win team, and they're going to be doing the same thing. We got to wait for the younger guys to progress. And this is where I'm going to butt heads with Scott Harris, probably for the remainder of his tenure here, because he is doing some things that I love. Report came out this week. Tigers have the #1 farm system in baseball, and they're showing an ability to actually develop players for once. That is huge. And Harris deserves a ton of credit for that because he's several years into this now. These are mainly his guys. That's great. And I think that you can rely on the principle of we are going to build around good young players while also being what I would call selectively aggressive in free agency. And that's like, I can't express to you guys enough how low, embarrassingly low this payroll is. I came into this year saying, man, I think Christian Walker would be a phenomenal option for the Tigers. Now, if somebody would have swooped in and said, you know what, we love Christian Walker, we're going to give him 5 years, $200 million, I would have said, okay, dude, fine. Like, go ahead, do your thing. You know, as much as I get upset by the lack of aggression, from a business standpoint, well, I would do it differently. I do understand somebody like Chris Ilitch saying, I'm not giving Ohtani $800 million. I'm not giving Juan Soto $800 million. Okay, I understand that to a point. Christian Walker got 3 years, $60 million, $20 million AAV for a mid-30s first baseman with a high floor and a pretty high ceiling, great defender, power hitter. Like, you could have signed that guy and gotten nothing. And to me, the biggest litmus test, and some people might roll their eyes at this because I've been so critical of this guy, to me, the biggest test for whether or not the Tigers are going to be serious this year. Now, adding Bregman would do a lot, but Spencer Torkelson is 1,300 at-bats into his major league career. 2 of those seasons have been in the Scott Harris era. I can't do another season of him starting every countdown 0-2. Like, of him playing a meaningful power offensive position and giving you nothing. And let me just say this on the record. It'll be December 23rd by the time you're listening to this. It's December 22nd as of the time I'm recording it. If Spencer Torkelson is this team's opening day first baseman next year and ends up having a really good season, it's luck. Okay. It's not, oh, they just had to wait for it. No, it's luck. Players who are this bad 3 full years into their major league careers, 95% of the time stay bad. Okay. If there is some sort of, somebody on Twitter pointing this out to me, some like JD Martinez type turnaround where he comes back a completely different player, it's still luck. It's good luck. It's luck I will welcome. Nothing would please me more than to see Spencer Torkelson be the player that we want him to be. But man, I mean, I think it's a hard sell to the fans to claim to be a serious contender and go into the year with that guy as your opening day first baseman. I mean, Cleveland traded Josh Naylor and immediately signed Carlos Santana, who, look, I'm not saying Santana is going to be ripping the cover off the ball. Carlos Santana is still a very respectable player. I mean, he's a very good defender at first. He still draws a ton of walks, and he's like 100 years old. You know, you're not even to that level. I mean, I even recommended to Cody Stavenhagen, I think they should go out and get Carlos Santana on a 1-year deal. And not to mention all these right-handed bats that the Tigers have rumored to have maybe been in on, they're going. No, Paul Goldschmidt gone. And they're not going to sign Pete Alonso. A lot of the other free agent first basemen that are on the market are lefties, and that kind of defeats the purpose because you've been talking about getting a right-handed bat. So it's not over, but we're experiencing the arc where we go through this every freaking year with this team. It's exceptionally annoying. And it's even more annoying because you're coming off of your best season in a decade where not just us, like the rest of the baseball world is looking for you to do something. Like, people, it wasn't just Tiger fans that got attached to that run last year. It was a lot of people. And so we want to see the big punch. And Bregman would be that big punch, but who knows? I don't know. They said Bregman won't sign until after Christmas. I don't know if he's just playing the Tigers like a fiddle, like the way that Ohtani and Soto played Toronto just to get the asking price up. I feel like I'm going to be monumentally disappointed. It's a strange thing because my optimism regarding the future of this organization does remain high. I do think regardless of what happens, they can have a pretty darn good team next year. But like, I don't really want a pretty darn good team. You know, I want a team that's winning the Central. You know, pretty darn good was fun last season. Yeah. Okay. That will do it for today's show. And that will do it for this year's worth of episodes. Now, we started this show in September, so I'm not going to do the whole soliloquy regarding the year that was, kind of a recap. But we started this thing at the beginning of football season. There will be no show next week, but we will jump right back into it the following week as we talk about Michigan's bowl game and obviously the story that's going to be the hot story over the next month or two is what the Lions are going to do late in the year and into the postseason. It was a very fascinating year in Michigan sports, and we had some really great moments. And again, I'm not going to stay here and recap, but I'll just say, and I told Anthony Bellino this when I had him on, that Tigers run was the most fun thing ever because it didn't make any sense. There were no expectations, and they just kept winning and winning and winning. I've said this a million times, but it can be a curse sometimes, but one of the greatest gifts of what I have the fortune of doing is the fact that so much of it is documented. And sometimes I go back and watch Tiger highlights and old post-game videos and reaction videos, and it feels like I'm experiencing it for the first time again. And to have had you guys along for the ride for that is very special. It meant a lot to me, and will continue to. And hopefully we can have another phenomenal year here in 2025. Content is not over, though, yet. I'll say this, we'll be back in 2025, but we do have a few more things coming up. Obviously, pay attention at Castellani 2014 on Twitter. We're on TikTok as well. There you'll find all the post-game videos that your mind desires. If you say to yourself, God, I like this guy, but I wish there was just a place that I could go to consume all his content, there is. Go to CastellaniContent.com. There is the one-stop shop for everything that Austin and I create. We're going to have a fun video. Top 10 favorite films video is going to be dropping here at some point before the end of the year. I don't think I've ever really done one of those. Austin did a bang-up job with the production, and usually list videos do pretty well. So, yeah, we're trying. And I'm always going to get frustrated by the lack of traction, but that doesn't mean that I'm not overwhelmingly appreciative of the people that have continued to support this. It kind of feels like we've gone back to square one in a lot of ways, but that doesn't mean that we aren't putting in the effort. So thank you guys very much for supporting us this year. Please have a safe, happy, healthy holiday. Go Lions, go Blue, go team. Appreciate y'all. Peace and happiness.